Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, and this is the new Gibson USA Charlie Starr Les Paul Jr. Let's get into it. So I'm a sucker for pretty much anything that's limited edition or limited release, and especially if it's a guitar. Now, I'll be honest with you, it's not very often that I can afford a limited edition guitar because it's not really worth the manufacturer's time to make one of those unless they can sell it for a lot of money because it's usually a pretty limited release. Well, this is a kind of unique guitar because Gibson is only making 250 of these in two different finishes, so 500 total. And to be honest with you, even though they are marked up, it wasn't as bad as what I was expecting. You know, if you look at like a Jimmy Page guitar and they go for 50 grand, I think even, or the limited edition Greenie that goes for 20 grand. Now, obviously this is not a custom shop model. This is just the Gibson USA shop, but it's pretty unique in that there's just such a small number of these limited edition guitars. This is one of two finishes. There's ebony and there's dark walnut. This is actually not my preferred color. I had a dark walnut on pre-order, and the major retailer that I got it from called me up about 20 minutes later and was like, hey, we don't know what happened, but your order got messed up. Can you replace the order in the system? And sure enough, when I went to do that, they were all sold out. And that was kind of the case all throughout the day that they announced this guitar. If you went to the Gibson website, they had them in stock, then they were out of stock. You put it in your cart, it would disappear. There's a lot of frustration around getting this model, and I kept doing the same thing. I was chasing each retailer trying to find one of these guitars because I just wanted to get my hands on one. Just when I was going to give up, I saw one that was available that was ebony, and I made the purchase, and I honestly expected that to get canceled. Sure enough, got a shipment notification the next day, and here it is now. And that was just last week that this happened, the tail end of last week. So yeah, let's get into this guitar and see what makes it special and see what makes it the same as every other Les Paul Jr. All right, let's go. So yeah, for the price, well, Gibson did mark this up a little bit. What's the price of a regular Les Paul Jr.? I think it's $1,600, $1,599 if you buy it brand new, right? And for this model, they decided to price it at $1,999 or about $2,000. But I'll be honest with you, I think that's actually not a bad deal for this limited edition model. And that does put it on par with the Billy Joe Armstrong Les Paul Jr. that came out, was that 2 years ago, something like that. And I think that retailed for the same thing. It was either $1,900 or $2,000. And I think this is actually a better deal than that. And as we get into this model and talk about it a little more, I think I can convince some of you that compared to the normal $1,500 or $1,600 price, the $400 markup maybe is worth it. We'll see at the end of the video. Now for the case, you get an upgraded lift-in gator case. Pretty cool, you don't see the gator option very often. There's a little Gibson badge on the front here with the star, and we open it up and we see that it's got a actually really nice soft brown padded interior. It's not quite shag, but it is a thick pad. So we'll talk about this envelope here in a second. Now there's a little lift-in logo right there next to the pocket, and a little Gibson branded pull strap for the pocket. Now inside the pocket is the goodie bag, and inside the goodie bag is the owner's manual, a Gibson polishing cloth, an ad for the Gibson app, a warranty card, a Gibson strap, the Gibson multi-tool, an optional blank truss rod cover, keys for the case, and look at this, a ceramic Charlie Starr signature slide. And inside that big black envelope we saw earlier, you get a giant "Hey Y'all" sticker and an application guide. Now, as Gibson mentions, the sticker is purposely spelled incorrectly. As you can see from this photo of Charlie with his guitar, he's got that same sticker on the back. And I think it's pretty cool that they give you a gator case. I mean, that right there is a $100 upgrade over the standard Gibson case. And don't get me started on the whole lift-in thing. I got on this diatribe on my last video, and basically, long story short is, yes, the same company's making both cases, but for whatever reason, lift-in is a markup. But on that note, the gator case is a little unique. You don't see that too often. Well, when it comes to the look of this guitar, it's a classic Les Paul Jr. It's a rock and roll machine, it's a country rock machine, it's a punk machine, it's a metal machine, it's pretty much whatever you want. Kind of its biggest limit is also its greatest versatility, is you just throw it in the mix and make it sing, and that's one of the things that I think almost everybody likes about the Les Paul Jr. Now this one isn't very different than any other Les Paul Jr. in the sense that it's still a slab body, about 1.75 inches thick, one pickup, one set of controls. The neck is almost flat to the body, nothing special there. But there's a few appointments on the Charlie Starr model that are a little bit different. Like obviously you probably noticed the bridge is a little different. The controls are aesthetically a little different. The pickup itself is a little bit different. We'll get into all that as this video goes on. But one thing I did want to point out was these finishes. Now this one is the ebony finish, and then there's another finish which is actually my preferred finish. That's called the dark walnut. These are both nitrocellulose finishes. This one is a matte or satin finish. And one thing I think is a problem with that, to me anyway, is that these generally tend to get shiny where they get more wearing or more friction, and I'm not a big fan of that look. Some people are, some people aren't. For me, I don't know, I would prefer just a gloss finish, but I'll be honest with you, this one doesn't look too bad. We'll see how the durability works as time goes on. Now, if you're wondering how Gibson came up with these two finishes, well, if you look at Charlie Starr's Les Paul Jr., you can see where it's wearing through there, the mahogany is starting to show. And I think what Gibson did is they said, let's do one in this finish here, and then where the mahogany is wearing through, let's do one that looks sort of like that, just like a general wood grain dark walnut. Now the neck on this guitar is all mahogany, as Gibson is known to use, except for the rare like maple release or something like that. But what makes the Charlie Starr Les Paul Jr. a little bit different is Gibson used what they call their proprietary scanning technology to make a 3D rendering of Charlie Starr's actual 1956 Les Paul Jr. and recreate that neck for this release. And what makes that really unique is that's something that Gibson generally reserves for their high-end models, like the Jimmy Page EDS 1275 or the Kirk Hammett Greenie $20,000 guitar. In fact, they didn't even do that for the $3,000 Gibson USA Greenie, or because they didn't do it for the Billy Joe Armstrong Les Paul Jr. So super cool that they put it on this model, which more or less is like your standard Gibson release. You don't really see that too often from them. Now, this is a standard 50s neck, which means it's a little fatter. As far as the measurements go, for the nut we get a 1.69, at the first fret we get a 0.82, and down at 12th fret we get a 0.94. Now Gibson did actually put one of these models on the demo shop recently, and out of curiosity I wanted to see how accurate the scanning technology was, so I scrolled down to their specs, and they had a 0.81 for the first fret and a 0.94 at the 12th, which puts it almost identical to this guitar in terms of thickness. Now that won't speak for the cut of the curve or anything like that, but I would be curious to feel some of the other Charlie Starr models and see if they do actually feel like this, because you've played slim taper necks and 50s necks, and even though the general thickness can be there, sometimes the way that your fingers wrap the board is a little different, or maybe the wrap where your thumb is, they're not always too identical. So it'd be really curious to see how that sits. And it should go without mentioning that this is a 12-inch radius board, which is pretty much standard Gibson stuff nowadays. Now the neck back angle from the body sits at about a 1.6 degrees, so it's almost perfectly flat to the body, not too much angle back. And then the headstock angles back from the neck at about 17 degrees, which is standard Gibson. Now there are a few hardware differences between the Charlie Starr Signature Les Paul Jr. and your standard Gibson USA Les Paul Jr. We'll start at the bottom though, and we'll work our way up to the top. So of course we start with the strap buttons. Now these are Gibson's sort of like vintage inspired strap buttons. They look similar to the old style strap buttons, but they're just a little bit thicker, and I'm sure that's just for better security of your strap. Now just over from that we get our metal jack plate there. And moving up from there, we get to our bridge, which is, of course, very different than what you get on a Les Paul Jr. Now, in interviews with Charlie Starr, he says that this is a Leo Kwan ripoff. And to be honest with you, I think that's what this is too. I know Sweetwater has listed this as a Leo Kwan, but after looking at it, the tooling marks are a little bit different. There's no stamp in the bottom, and it's possible that allparts.com made these for Gibson and just made them a little different looking. Or maybe Gibson has a shop that they use, like Advanced Plating or something, that came up with this design. I have no idea. But it does look a little bit different than the Leo Kwan Badass Bridge, but I think the function is probably nearly identical. Now, where this bridge differs from your standard Les Paul Jr. wraparound is that you can see there's like a built-in intonation there, which is very similar than what you would get on a Tune-o-matic bridge. So what happens here is the strings wrap in underneath on the underside, of course, and they wrap around this bar here. Now what's nice is this bar is completely rounded, so there's no like hard kinks in the string like you get on a general wraparound bridge. They actually just come to a nice smooth curve before they go through the saddles here. And then you do have individual intonation adjustment, which would be a little difficult with this P90 here. You'd need like a crazy screwdriver to get in there. these studs that hold the bridge in actually lock the bridge in place. So you want to make sure when you put this bridge on there that you tighten those down, because otherwise the bridge will start to tilt. Now, I don't really know what the purpose of those locking studs are. I've seen those on like a melody maker where the bridge more serves as the intermediate between the nut and a vibrola or something, so the bridge can come loose and you want to have a tendency to lock that in. But I don't really know the benefit here other than maybe locking it in while you're stringing so that it doesn't fall off. To be honest, I have no idea. Maybe somebody else has a better idea. Now, in case you're wondering, this wraparound bridge does weigh about twice as much as your standard wraparound bridge. This comes in at around 4 ounces, which isn't light, of course, but it definitely has a lot more function than a average wraparound bridge. Now, next up from there, we're going to move on to the frets. Of course, Gibson put on their medium jumbo frets, which is standard on pretty much almost every Gibson USA release nowadays. And then moving up from there, we get to our truss rod. Now, our truss rod on this guitar is your standard Gibson truss rod. You're going to need like a hex key or something that's included in the Gibson multi-tool to adjust it, although that seems like it might be a little difficult with that thing. And then lastly, we get up to the tuners. Now, it looks like on Charlie Starr's guitar, he's got maybe the Schaller tuners or something. They're definitely a little bit different than what Gibson gives you, which is the Grover Rotomatics on this. And the Grover Rotomatics are a little bit different than what Gibson gives you normally on the Les Paul Jr., which is the Vintage Deluxe tuners. Now, these ones do have the little kidney keys there, as you can see. And if you're wondering about the ratio for these, well, it's your standard Gibson USA 14:1 tuning ratio. Now, something I was thinking about just now, and I figured I'd ask you guys, what do you think of these kidney tuning keys here? I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of the keystone shape. I've never really been a big fan of these, and on a lot of my guitars, I swap them out for the keystones. Just curious what you guys think, because, I don't know, just something I'm thinking about right now. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of this video, the electronics are a little bit different than what you get on a normal Les Paul Jr., but it's not too crazy. So for the pickup, generally you get a P90. Well, in this case, you got the P90 as well, but what makes this one a little bit different is you see where it says P90 dog ear OW. Well, the OW means overwound, and I'm pretty excited to try that because it's not very often that you get to try a little bit different of a P90, and to be honest with you, usually when Gibson redoes the P90, they do something like a hum canceling, like the P90 Sidewinder or something like that. But this is just a little bit different in that it's overwound. Now, I've played the P90 underwound from the Gibson pickup shop, and I've certainly played regular P90s, but I've never played a P90 overwound. Now, when we look at the readings here, well, I'm getting a 9.03 on this pickup, which isn't really super overwound. I mean, the normal P90s, you're getting about an 8K resistance, and those are Alnico 5 magnets. And then the underwounds were somewhere around like a 7K resistance and Alnico 3 magnets. So I'm curious what they use for the magnets on this. Couldn't find any information online, but that being said, it's only reading at about 9K, so I don't expect it to be dramatically different, but maybe just have a little bit more heat when you really drive it. Now let's flip it over and look in the cavity here, and it's actually quite simple. Your one volume pot and your one tone pot. Now for the cap, we've got a 22 microfarad orange drop capacitor. Pretty simple and clean. I think one area that they missed an opportunity was maybe wiring this with vintage wiring like Charlie's guitar no doubt has, or at least had at one point. But they opted to go with the modern wiring, and maybe with just having one pickup in the bridge position, it doesn't really matter too much. Who knows? Now for other materials, we'll just start here at the bottom. The guitar has two unmarked, or numberless, as Gibson calls them, amber speed knobs. Now, these are a little bit different than Charlie Starr's in the sense that if you actually look at this photo, you can see the numbers were there at some point, and either they've been scratched off or over time they've just become nothing, but you can still sort of make out the numbers. These are kind of cool and kind of unique, and obviously it's not any different than like the knobs you would see on a Telecaster or something like that, where you don't really truly know the position in terms of what number it's sitting at. So in that sense, they don't really bother me at all, and I think it's a unique addition for a Gibson guitar. Where it does bother me is, as a reviewer going to test this guitar in a little bit and trying to mark down where I think the knobs are at, so that when I make this video later, I can say, oh, this was with the volume at 7 and the tone at 3. So I'll just have to do my best to figure that out. That's probably not a problem for most people out there, but if you are tracking in the studio, maybe that's something to think about. Now moving up from there, we get to the solid black pickguard. This is the same pickguard that's available on both models. It looks like it's just a fat single ply, nothing too special there. And in case you're curious, there's nothing underneath it either. Now when we move over to the P90, you've got your dog ear cover there, black plastic, nothing crazy there. Moving up here to the fretboard, we've got our acrylic dot inlays going up and down the board. And then on the side, of course, we've got these little white fret markers marking the frets as well. Then from there we go to the Graphtec nut. Now one thing I've been pleased to see lately from Gibson is it looks like they've been putting the correct angle hashes in the Graphtec nuts there. For a while seemed like it was just a straight line, and of course you get these tuning problems or the strings just catching or something like that. So I've been pleased to see that, and this guitar is no exception. Then we move on to our truss rod cover here with Charlie Starr's signature. As I mentioned earlier, there is the optional blank truss rod cover in the bag. And then lastly, we get to our silk screened logo there, Gibson at the very top, and Les Paul Jr. right there between the tuning pegs. And lastly, we flip the guitar over and you've got your pill-shaped cavity cover there, nothing too crazy, standard all black. Now for the feel of this guitar, well, it actually feels pretty balanced, and that's actually a welcome change for most of the guitars I've been reviewing lately, which are SGs that are neck heavy or, Les Pauls that are super body heavy. So I'm actually thinking this one's going to feel really good when I'm sitting there playing it. Now the weight of this guitar is 7.71 pounds, or just about 7 pounds and 12 ounces. I did see an interview with Charlie Starr where he says that this guitar, well, not this one, but his 1956 that this is based on, is his favorite guitar, and it's also a heavy guitar. Now he stops short of saying just how much it weighs, but that really got me thinking, how much does this one weigh compared to other Les Paul Juniors? Now going back to that Gibson listing on the demo shop of their Charlie Starr Les Paul Jr., well, that one they say weighs 7.9 pounds. So this one is technically the lightest of the Les Paul Juniors that I have weighed. I don't really know what that means in terms of the sound or the sustain, but that's definitely something to note, right? Now in terms of the neck dive test, this is a 2-inch Couch brand strap. I think this is a pretty common strap. Looking pretty good actually, huh? This is what everyone does when they put their guitar on, right? Yeah, that actually felt really balanced. Now for the actual feel of the guitar as a guitarist, well, I've mentioned before I've got these big dumb hands and they don't exactly feel the most intricate of details on a neck. But I will say that for a Fat 50's neck, it's actually on the thinner side. I mean, this thing had a rise of, what was it, 1/10 of an inch between the 1st fret and the 12th fret, which is not a lot. I mean, my 1960s Melody Maker has a difference of something like 3/10 between the 1st fret and the 12th fret, which is an appreciable difference. For this one, it's not so bad. It actually does feel pretty good. I can understand why, if this does actually feel like Charlie Starr's Les Paul Jr., why he might like this, because even though it does have a little bit of heft to it, it's not so thick that you find it constricting in the way that you play. But it also has a nice taper around the edge that could lend itself to some quality playing in the hands of a great guitarist. So now let's jump into the sound test. We'll see how this thing sounds. I'll try different combinations of the volume and the tone. I'll do my best to take accurate readings of that so I can display that on the screen while I'm playing. And maybe if you have one of these guitars or you get your hands on one in the future, you could recreate those sounds or something similar to that. All right, guys, that is my conclusion of the Charlie Starr Les Paul Jr. Limited Edition. If you get your hands on one of these, let me know what you think about it, or if you just have any comments in general, please leave them below. I try to answer every single one of them if I have anything relevant to say. If you did like this video, please subscribe or consider liking the video. That always helps me out. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you.